Welcome to Work This Way, a Maynard Nexsen labor and employment podcast. I'm Tina Emerson, here today with Maynard Nexsen employment lawyer Jennie Cluverius. Good to see you, Jennie.
Good to be here, Tina.
In the studio with us today is our very own Angela O'Neill. She's Director of Nextra Solutions, an affiliate of Maynard Nexsen that offers information management and electronic discovery services. Angela's here to talk with us today about document preservation obligations and litigation holds. Angela, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, guys.
Good to see you. Can you please start off by telling us a little bit about Nextra Solutions and your services?
Essentially, we are a eDiscovery vendor within the Maynard Nexsen family. Essentially, what we do is we help you streamline your eDiscovery process from information governance to production. We run the gamut, and we just want to be your partner in litigation, whatever need you may have.
Hey, Angela, as we are all well aware by now, the large majority of workplace communications and other documents occur and are created electronically. It is almost always, if not always, the case in employment-related litigation that these electronic communications and documents and data are at issue and are sought during discovery. We also know that employers have certain preservation obligations with respect to electronic data. And we hear the term often litigation hold. Explain for our audience what a litigation hold is.
Essentially, in a nutshell, it is the obligation of the employer, in this case, employer, to preserve all relevant evidence in anticipation of litigation. And I think I focus on anticipation of litigation because I think courts have differed on this and employers differ on this. But if you think that there's going to be litigation, then your duty to preserve attaches at that moment. And it's, I don't know if this is part of what you want me to answer as well, but you talked a lot about electronic discovery. But what I want to focus on, it's like any document or any piece of information that may be under your care, custody, and control, you have an obligation to preserve it at that moment.
So when we talk about emails, for example, that would include implementing a litigation hold, would include not only capturing a copy of the email, but also the metadata underlying the email or on a Word document or that type of thing. Any electronic data associated with it.
Yeah, we wanted to be in the present state as soon as you knew the litigation hold was going to be implemented. And so it's emails. That's the biggest source. I think that's the most common source. That's where most people automatically go. And then it's our job at Nextra Solutions to help you see your whole data mapping system so that you know exactly what you need to preserve.
And let's discuss when an employer may need to consider implementing a litigation hold in employment-related cases. This is an issue that folks get tripped up on at times, especially in the employment context. Provide us with your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think initially, and it depends on what's going on, but I think even when you get an EEOC complaint, like a litigation hold obligation attaches at that moment. You're not thinking about it in that moment because it's just just respond to this. But that's the point where, there could be potential litigation. It may be that you go through the EEOC complaint and they say, we didn't find enough here, right? But that doesn't mean the employee can't still bring a suit on their own. So I think it's important. That's when it starts. Or even if someone says, I think it's simple, but if someone says, I'm going to sue you, from a bad conversation, or if they're in the process of being terminated and they say, I'm going to sue you, I think it's reasonable for someone in HR to assume they need to let someone know about that, first of all, alert general counsel or even your outside counsel at that moment, and to let them help you make the decision of should you start retaining information at that point.
Okay, so being on notice of anticipated or threatened litigation is obviously key. Angela, employers frequently think about preserving and collecting things like emails, Word documents, that sort of data when there's anticipated or actual litigation threatened. Are there some places where data or documents might be stored that employers should be, but generally are not thinking of when they are implementing a litigation hold and trying to preserve and collect data?
That's funny. I think I have two answers for you. I would have a pre-COVID answer, and then I have a post-COVID answer. I think pre-COVID, it was emails, it was Word documents, it was a server, if you may. But post-COVID, I think it's everything in the world that we live in. Because, if you think about it, we went from working in offices to everyone working at home. And I think one thing that employers haven't done, I haven't seen enough of, is they haven't updated their litigation hold preservation letters. They'll say here, you need to preserve all email. Now we're talking mobile phones, we're talking smartwatches, we're talking iPads, we're talking Alexa devices. We're talking anywhere where you could be offering information that may be relevant to a matter. And it's not for the employee or your employees to decide what is relevant and what isn't relevant. The court's going to hold you responsible as the top of what you should collect. So I think that it's Teams data. A lot of people work with Microsoft and they don't think they grab their Teams data. It's I know for our firm, we use Cisco internally, and there's messaging feature. Anywhere you think there's a messaging feature, WhatsApp. I tell you, Signal, we're still trying to track down how to get Signal data. So if someone's listening and you have any ideas for me, let me know. Because Signal is about the only thing that you can't really preserve because it truly does disappear. It truly is a secure method. But, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, all of those things, you have a duty to preserve those if they're under your care, custody, and control. And just to not get in, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but the bring your own device policies that firms have or employers or corporations have where, it's my personal device. But if you use that device for business, then it is no longer your personal device. I always tell people get 2 phones. It may be hard, it may be difficult, but then you can clearly say, I use this for work only, or I use it for personal only, because the worst thing is you never wanted something to be in a USA Today that you did not intend for the entire world to see.
Now, if a litigation hold isn't issued timely, or if it's not implemented properly, what, from a preservation standpoint, are the potential consequences for the employer?
I mean, spoliation is a consequence. I say that because then if you haven't put it in place timely, there's data that has been lost, right? And you can't recover it. And courts don't look highly upon that. I think that courts, as technology has advanced, I think the courts are now advancing with that technology, and there's an expectation that you know what to do when you know there's going to be anticipation of litigation. But it's spoliation. And then I think I think that it actually end up hurting your case, because what if the other side, the employee in this, and we're talking employee relationships, they captured that email because they had it, forwarded it to, I don't care how they captured it, but they have it, and it's like key to litigation. And then your counsel also can't help you properly prepare for litigation or to respond to an EEOC complaint, or it could create litigation when there probably isn't some needed at times. But I think the biggest thing is that you have a spoliation issue. But the other thing about it is, what are you doing as a company to ensure that that doesn't happen? And I think that's the bigger piece of this is what are you doing? What thresholds do you have in place that would prevent you from not implementing this policy, early enough? But the other part that goes along with that is, even if you implement it, you still have a duty to make sure that it's being carried out, right? Especially sometimes in long-term litigation, you forget or you check, or an employee leaves. I've run into pitfalls where an employee may have left a firm, and the firm policy is to wipe the laptop clean, right? But that person was under litigation hold. And so HR probably forgot about it, IT forgot about it. So as the employer, you have a duty to constantly update that and make people aware of that litigation hold is still in place.
So, Angela, you touched on this briefly, but I wanted to dig into it just a little bit further. Obviously, there are spoliation, data preservation consequences in the event an employer doesn't timely and properly implement and execute a litigation hold. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about a different aspect of that, which is the potential consequences for the people involved including the attorneys, but also HR professionals that may be working in-house with some of our clients. If individuals fail to execute a litigation hold or implement a litigation hold appropriately, do they potentially face sanctions and that type of thing from the court as a result of that failure?
I think eventually, like, the court is going to look at who the party is that's being sued. What I think can happen, though, internally is, I'm employer and I give you HR, you're in charge of litigation hold. I mean, you could eventually lose your job because it's going to cost the company bottom line. I mean, I think when court looks at sanctions for spoliation issues, I think they try to weigh like the prejudicial value of what was lost. I think they also try to was it intentional or was it, a real innocent mistake? And that happens. Like we're human, like we make mistakes, but was it intentional? And then once you notice the issue, did you change? Did you change your behavior? Did you make sure that, oh, wow, we didn't have this in place? Okay. Did we try to recover the data and then we moving forward, this is what we're doing? And I think most courts don't like to sanction lawyers for spoliation issues. I don't think they're in the business of doing that. But it could make I've seen it where, they made an inference because the data was gone. The court has said, okay, because you destroyed the data, this is the inference that we're going to take from that. Like, was it used? Did you do it on purpose? Did you destroy it because you think it would be prejudicial to your case? Right? And then the court would say, okay, that's what you did. And that's what they found that they did. I can't remember the name because I'm old. But, there was an issue where maybe in Capital One litigation where they discovered that there was a spoliation issue and they continued to spoil, right? You have a duty to correct it. And I think that when you take that to the court will look at it and be like, okay, yeah, they messed up. But, I'm going to give them, I'm going to let that slide because they've corrected the issue. And then, sometimes, and I'll say this, we live in a world where we think just because we deleted on server A, there's a backup of it somewhere in the cloud of the universe that we live in these days. So I think that it's what you do. It's your behavior once you notice that there's an issue. And do you do everything in your power to correct it?
In all the work that you've done in eDiscovery, where have you seen with clients where they've lost maybe a massive amount of data during discovery and you think to yourself, wow, if they had only just done this before, maybe they would have been able to retain it? Have you seen that? And what do you think businesses can do to keep that from happening during discovery?
Well, they should hire me. No, but honestly, I think it starts with your information governance policy, and I know that's not what I'll come back and talk to y'all if y'all want me to talk about that. But it really starts with your records retention policy. And how are you have a records retention policy. Now, everyone will say they have one, but are you actually following your records retention policy? And what are you doing for compliance on that? So my first advice to someone like that, okay, hey, where are the records, right? And then are we following the policy? And I think that sometimes I've seen it happen where people have said, I've seen it both ways. I've heard people say, oh, we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have anything in hard copy. And if you were to walk upstairs right now, there are about 20 boxes of hard copy data that they said they didn't even know they had, right? Because it was just sitting in a room. Luckily, they asked me, they called me early. And I think the earlier you involve an eDiscovery professional, the better it is, because they would have said we didn't have it. And we need that information actually. But I think that so I've seen it where, but the biggest problem for me is when people worry about the cost of eDiscovery and the cost of litigation, and they try to do things themselves. And a lot of times it's a mistake. I mean, a lot of times I don't think anyone is out here intentionally trying to destroy material, but I think that it's a mistake because they haven't planned properly. And I think that if you plan properly, then that won't be an issue. I'm fine with your retention policy being 30 days, but make sure you follow that retention policy for 30 days. Because if you don't, then the other side has an argument because, hey, you have a policy, but you're not following it. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is that's why I've seen the issue.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I just wanted to tag on to something Angela just said. People trying to do this on their own and collect emails on their own, preserve this data on their own. We do frequently see employers get into trouble in that respect because our federal courts are very sophisticated now. In fact, I know a lot of federal judges are taught by eDiscovery experts in this area, and they are very savvy in this realm. you can't walk into court and expect that the judge won't know as much as you do about eDiscovery, and they are going to have higher expectations for lawyers and frankly sophisticated companies than they do for maybe a mom and pop shop or an individual defendant. And just back to the point about sanctions, it can happen, as Angela mentioned, that an adverse inference is entered in a case, or monetary sanctions have even been issued with respect to lawyers and HR professionals, people who are in charge of implementing and executing on these litigation holds who failed to do so. So I will just say, from my standpoint, in my cases, one of my first calls when I get a call on a matter from a client is to call Nextra and engage them and start implementing the litigation hold process, and using their expertise to collect the data and the documents appropriately is huge for employment practitioners and HR professionals alike.
No, I would definitely agree with everything Jennie just said, and she does call us frequently, which is good. I mean, I like the calls, but I think that the scary, when you mentioned this, and I should admit, the proportionality issue, like a court will look differently on a smaller company than, let's say, a Xerox, because they think that they do. Doesn't mean that they're not going to be held to the same standard. They're just going to look at them a little differently. And also, in a lot of employment cases, I mean, speaking from the defense side, I would say, is that like, we have the data, right? And the courts realize that you have most of the data as the employer, and the employee is going to have the least amount of data. So you're going to get, they may be able to spoil something like inadvertently, and it won't be the same sanction from the court than if an employer did it. Because it's something we do every day too.
So, Angela, we've already established that you're the director for Nextra Solutions. And we've spent a lot of time today talking about litigation holds, their implementation, their execution, which is a very key part of any piece of anticipated litigation or actual litigation. Can you talk to us a little bit before we leave you about how Nextra assists employers with the implementation of litigation holds in particular? What role does Nextra serve in that respect?
One, the first thing is that we help with the preservation. Like, we walk them through, ideally, like, we walk them through the process of, like, what needs to be preserved. And that's through interviews, like custodian interviews, usually whoever, the GC. And the preservation part is for us. It's like, how do we get this information as it stands today in this present form? Right? And the ongoing part. Our first thing, right? Usually when we go in, we want to know, how do we preserve what it is today? Right? Or sometimes we get stuff when it's, 30 days old, but then we go back to that original date because that's what is the expectation is. So we talked to them about preserving, and then how our team can help walk them through that process of implementing the legal hold. Like, who needs to be on it? Like, how do we check and verify that they did receive the legal hold? Like, the audit trails. We want to create an audit trail because we want to make this process as defensible as possible during the process of litigation. And then we help them collect the data so that the case team can start reviewing. So our first two steps are preserving and then the collection. And we briefly talked about collecting, but for us, let us, the experts, do the collection. Because what happens is, there's business interruption to you. Like, these are true stories. I had a client the other day that said, you know what? We tried to do this. It took us 2 weeks to get this data, and our IT department was on shutdown for 2 weeks because they were trying to figure out how to collect this data. They were like, the headache to us is, we now understand what you were saying. So the headache to us is no longer our headache. And so we went in and collected it without business interruption, a seamless process. We got the data, and our case team was able to access it quicker, which means that they could help them investigate and determine what's going on, or do they have a case or not. So I think the two things for us initially is the preserving is like, let's get this data, stop what you're doing, and then we're going to collect it and see what we have. But doing that also helps us to determine quickly, it helps the case to determine quickly, like, what's going on here. They can do an investigation really quickly or get started quickly.
And so for folks who may find implementing a litigation hold intimidating, contacting you all is like pressing the easy button, and it makes it
the Staples
easier.
button. Yeah, the
Staples easy button.
Yes.
And you all come in and you explain to them exactly what needs to happen, and then you execute on that with your Nextra team.
Yes, 100%, all day, every day.
Well, you guys have given us a lot to think about before litigation and when litigation is imminent. It's a perfect example, especially in your stories, Angela, of the things that you've seen of how things can go wrong and also how things can go well. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Thanks, Jennie, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we will see you next time on Work This Way.